Picture yourself sitting in an airplane seat, pressed against the window, watching the runway shrink below you. You've done this dozens of times. You know what to expect. The roar of the engines, the tug of the wheels leaving the ground, the city dissolving into a patchwork of fields and highways far below. And then, halfway through the flight, you glance at the window beside you. You see it, a tiny hole, perfectly round, sitting at the bottom of the inner pane of glass. Maybe you've noticed it before and dismissed it. Maybe this is the first time you've ever looked closely enough to see it at all. Your first instinct might be concern. Is this a crack? Should you call a flight attendant? Here is the truth. That hole is not a defect. It was put there deliberately by engineers who understood something most passengers never stop to think about. That tiny gap is the only thing ensuring a window endures every single flight without tearing itself apart under forces most of us cannot imagine. To understand why it exists, you have to go back to the early days of high-altitude commercial aviation. Before the 1940s, aircraft flew low, where the air was thick enough to breathe. But when manufacturers began pushing planes higher and faster, they faced an immediate and serious problem. The air at cruising altitude is far too thin for human survival. So engineers began sealing the cabin and pumping it full of pressurized air, creating a comfortable environment inside the aircraft while the outside world remained hostile and thin. This was a brilliant solution, but it introduced an enormous and constant mechanical stress. Because now, at 35,000 feet, the inside of the aircraft was pressurized to the equivalent of an altitude of about 8,000 feet, while the outside remained near the top of the atmosphere. That pressure difference, roughly 6 or 7 pounds bearing down on every single square inch of the fuselage and windows, does not stop for a moment during the entire flight. The aircraft is perpetually fighting the urge to blow outward like a balloon. Which brings us back to the window. Here is where the engineering becomes quietly extraordinary. Most airplane windows are not one pane of glass. They are 3 separate layers. The outermost pane faces the atmosphere. It is the structural one, built to carry the full burden of that pressure difference. Behind it sits a middle pane, slightly thinner. And then, closest to you, there is a thin inner pane, which exists only to protect the others from scratches. Think of it like a sandwich, the tough outer layers bearing the load, the softer layer in front there to take the daily wear. Now here is the critical detail. That small hole you noticed sits in the middle pane. Without it, the air trapped between the inner and middle pane would sit at cabin pressure. The middle pane would then share the structural work with the outer pane, and neither one would be carrying its intended load. Engineers call this mismanaged stress distribution. The simpler way to say it is, you do not want 2 workers splitting a critical job if you need one of them rested and ready to take over alone in an emergency. By drilling that tiny hole, engineers allow cabin air to bleed through continuously, equalizing the pressure on both sides of the middle pane. The middle pane feels almost nothing. It rests idle, held in reserve. All of that atmospheric force is channeled entirely onto the outer pane, exactly where the engineers designed it to land. And if the outer pane ever develops a crack or fails in some way, the middle pane is fresh, unstressed, and ready to take over. The hole is not just a valve. It is a contingency plan built into every window on every commercial aircraft. There is a second function, quieter but just as practical. The temperature gap between the warm cabin and the frozen atmosphere outside causes moisture to condense inside the window cavity, which would fog the glass or frost it from within. The bleed hole lets that moisture escape continuously, keeping every window clear across the entire flight. So a single pinhole is doing 3 separate jobs at once: managing pressure, protecting structural redundancy, and preventing frost. It has been part of commercial aircraft windows for decades. Almost no one who has sat beside a window and looked out at the clouds has ever asked why it was there. And that is precisely what makes it worth noticing. The engineering that keeps us safe at altitude rarely announces itself. It is quiet, small, and invisible. A hole so tiny you could cover it with a fingernail, managing forces that would shatter unprotected glass in an instant. Next time you take your seat and turn toward the window, look a little closer. That pinhole is not nothing. It is in many ways one of the most important features on the entire plane. Subscribe to the Hidden History of How, new hidden story every week.